Devaluation. That's what's happening right now. Devaluation. Now, what does it mean to devalue? Because when you have something and, next thing you know, everything loses value, that's devaluation. That's what's happening right now, everywhere. I'm experiencing that. And, some people just, they like to devalue, you know. That's what's happening right now. You're seeing it everywhere. And that's, this modern generation, that's all they do is devalue. So, how do you face devaluation? Well, you have to see, okay, what am I devaluing? What is not devalued yet? Because once you devalue something, that's when everything turns down. So here's what's the solution. You want to look into what's happening, and you just want to say, okay, what is something that I do not want to lose? What's something that I just can't lose? And then you want to say, okay, I'm going to change this, this, and this in order for me to not lose this. So next thing you know, you see the up and downs, or rather the trade-offs, and then you want to say, okay, is this worth the trade-off? Is this worth, keeping something that's very high value that I do not want to lose, and facing the trade-off and what you're going to lose if you decide to take into a different approach in order for this to work. So, it's a very complicated topic, because that's something that a lot of people just don't have any skills. So, it's very uncommon that people succeed from this, because once you devalue, it's very hard to come back. But you have to be willing to just push very hard to maintain core values, core strength, everything, because once you lose that, it's pretty much it's game over type of thing. And it doesn't have to be like that. It's like going into bankruptcy. You can absolutely come back, but it's going to be very hard, and sometimes people don't even want to talk to you. And that's what happens. I don't want to talk to people who devalue themselves, and that's a big issue. Following the topic of devaluation, it's so imperative that you really have to wonder and really think and ponder why it's so important to maintain your value, because devaluing is such an important situation, because what could happen is you devalue yourself, you devalue anything that you have into something that has value to something that's worthless. That can cause huge problems, big strains, big problems. And so this is why devaluation is such an important situation, because it's happening everywhere, with money, relationships, people, jobs, anything. And so it's so important to make sure that we actually have value in our lives, even if it's something small, like having value in your favorite book, right? You want to have something that has value. Once you have something that has value, you want to maintain the value. You don't want to devalue something. And so here's another example. Money is easily devalued. I mean, you take a look what's happening with the government. They keep printing money. Money is death now. It's devalued. There's no value whatsoever. But if you want to give money and value, you put something that has value, like an asset. But that's a whole different topic for a different conversation, a different day. But look, another conversation that I want to bring up is risk. And a lot of people say that taking a risk is a good thing. A lot of people are taught that doing a risk is a good thing. That's what we're taught in schools, right? Well, look, put it like this. Taking a risk it means that you don't know what you're doing. Because let's say, for example, let's say I put, and this is like I mean, this can be used for anything, not just for investing terms, but just to give an example of what I mean. Let's say I put $100 in a stock, right? That I have no idea what it is. I have no idea what it does. I have no idea what the company does. I'm taking a risk, right? That's a risk after all. Let's say I lose like in 1 year. I hold it for 1 year. I lose about $50, so it's like half, right? Devalue. So, that's a risk. I lost like $50. Half. So, that's really risky. That's something that, even if it's your last $100, if you never invested, that's a huge risk. Now, if I knew what I was doing, or someone, it could be anyone, the same stock, the same, anything, right? The same stock, the same time period. So let's say someone put $100 in. To them, it may not be risky. Or let's say it's not even risky. Why? Because they know what they're doing. They know they're either going to make money or lose money. They know how the market works. You're taking a risk because you don't know what you're doing. It's not a risk because you know what you're doing. If you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to take a risk in doing this, it means you don't know what you're doing. You're taking a risk. It's like a 50-50, right? Sometimes 30%, 70%. You never know what's going to happen, right? It's a risk. If I do something that I probably never done, I may have done it, but I probably never done like fully or all the time, and if I knew what I was doing with it, I'm not taking a risk because I know what's going to happen. I'm not taking a risk. I know what's the outcome. I know that I'm either going to really succeed or do a mistake, learn from it, and then, succeed the next time. It's not risk. You shouldn't be doing risk. You should know what you're doing first before you actually do the real thing. And so, that's why a lot of people fail. And I'm not saying failing is a bad thing. I just, if failing is a bad thing, if you're not learning from it. So this is why a lot of people fail when they do risk, because they take a risk, they fail, and they never want to do it again. It's like, oh man, it's too risky. I don't want to do it, right? Some people, they will say, you know what, this is risky. Well, let me learn from it, do it again, and it's not risky anymore because I know what I'm doing. So, that's why, knowing what the evaluation is and knowing what a risk is so important in this world. It's very, very important. And honestly, knowing what these two are will give you a road for success down the line. It takes years and years. And that's what I noticed. I know so many people who are much, much older than me, probably older than you. I don't know how, some of these viewers are watching this, but if you're watching this, you probably know what I'm talking about. Those of you who are, much older than me, I'm in my early 20s. But what I noticed is that a lot of people who are much, much older than me, and it doesn't have to be like in the same type of career. It could be any career, right? The reason why they're successful is because it took a lot of time. It took years and years and years. And, the things that I found was that they knew what a risk was, and they knew what devaluation was. They know that what these two meant. You don't want to devalue yourself or anything else. You don't want to do that. You don't want to take risk, because you have to know what you're doing. And so that's what I noticed is that with these successful people, it took them years, and it took them knowing these two things, right? And it's imperative that we learn about these things, because we don't even learn these things in school, let alone in college, right? So it's so important to know these things. Another topic that I want to bring up is going against the tide. Now, what does that mean, going against the tide? You're probably thinking like you're in the ocean, right? And there's a tide. You want to go against it, right? Most people, they'll just, go with it because they think it's a fun thing. That's what most people do, right? So going against the tide means not doing what people are doing. So here's what I mean. And it's easy to think about it. So let's say I, am in a room full of people, and everybody agreed to do one thing, right? They all, let's say for example, they agreed to drink this, right? Well, for me, going against the tide, I will, drink water, right? That's what it means going against the tide. So here's what I found out. With people who are successful that I know of, they went against the tide. They followed their own path. They did not went what other people told them or what they're seeing from other people. Short, basically, long story short, they're not being average, is what I'm doing my best to say. Is that going against the tide means do not be average. Being average means that, okay, look, if you want an average lifestyle, normal life, normal job, normal this, normal everything, go ahead. If that's your thing, then go ahead. But some people are not meant to be like that. So this is why I say go against the tide if you want to be successful in life. And sometimes it's a hard thing to do. Sometimes it's all about the right timing. Sometimes it's all about having luck, which you can create luck. Some people are just born lucky, but you have to create luck. But look, it's all about going against the tide to be successful. That's what it takes to be successful in life. Is that just do not follow the crowd. Do not do what people are doing. Don't follow what other people are doing. Don't be average. Do the complete opposite of what people are doing. If people are doing one thing, you want to do the opposite. And that really correlates with, let's say, for example, investing. Let's say stock market. Everybody's investing AI, this and that. I'm not. I'm going against the tide. I'm doing different things, and I'm probably more successful than some people are. I don't mean to, disrespect some of my friends who do that, but a lot of them, they're being too controlled by these things. And with me going against the tide is that I'm not being controlled by anything. I'm doing my own thing. A lot of people in terms of investing that I'm talking about is that some of these people, they focus on one thing so much and they start freaking out. And it's all they know. That's all they talk about is the same thing over and over and over again. And they're just being average. They're just doing what other people are doing. And by going against the tide is that you start finding success because when so many people are doing one thing, it creates so many problems, so many issues, so many problems. And so this is why it's so important to really go against the tide. And one thing that I recently noticed about going against the tide is that once you start doing that, you really lose a lot of people. You lose friends, but you lose people. Because there's a difference between knowing people and being friends with people, right? But if that's what it takes to be successful, then, so be it. Sometimes some people just don't know what life is really about. And that's another thing I want to bring up too. Look, everybody has different rates of maturity. Some people mature at the age, mentally wise. Some people mature at the age of 18. Some people mature at the age 35. It just depends on their lifestyle and their surroundings. But you have to know what life is really about. Because if you're out there, let's say you're a 25-year-old, you play video games all day, are you really doing anything contributing to life? Yeah, you may have a part-time job, but it's like, are you really doing anything productive? And then, some people, the same people who are in that category, they complain about so many things, ungrateful, they lie a lot, very ungrateful, and they don't follow these rules, going against the tide. They don't believe in devaluation. They don't believe in taking risk. It's wrong. So there's a lot of people out there who are much older than me, and some are younger than me, right? But they really don't know what life is about because they think everything's easy. They think everything is easy. And sometimes you have to remove those people, because if you're stuck with those same people, problems happen. Then the person that you used to be going against the tide. Now, guess what? You're being manipulated, be controlled by those people who, they're being average. Now you really start being average because you're hanging out with the wrong people. That's why it's important to hang out with the right people. And hanging out with the right people is very important. You don't want to be with someone who does not know what life is about. And life is about having balance. Having balance, and this is my own thing. And some people had different terms of balances, but for me, what the word balance means in terms of life is having balance in emotion and emotions. Sad, happiness, anger, whatever it is, all emotions have to be balanced. You can't be happy all the time. You can't be sad all the time. It takes balance to know what life is about. Different experiences, different life experiences. And, just because you're young doesn't mean that you have to experience everything. Everything comes when the time is right. Some people, and I know of, and I can say this about myself too, because recently I am experiencing this, but some people like me, sometimes we get upset when we don't experience a certain thing, and that's okay because we're still young. I'm still young. Probably you who are watching are young, around my age, but you're not gonna experience everything in life in 1 year. It takes time, it takes effort, patience, and you really have to understand that along the way, if people are not willing to respect that, then they're not really valued people. They're people that they still need time to figure things out, mature, and maybe even a wake-up call. I noticed a lot of people are like that nowadays.